What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. The Kalos region is one that's full of beauty and adventure. Generation 6 marked a time of transition in the Pokémon franchise that hadn't seen such a jump since the original DS came out. But they made full use of it in this glorious new region that, if we're being honest, might have elevated many people's perception of its real-life equivalent, just because of how impressive and invigorating it was. But even with all the accolades, you still have to admit that it's not perfect. So, here are my top 6 Pokémon problems with the Kalos region. Number 6. 3 sections? I quite enjoyed my time in Kalos, but after I went through, I must admit that there are places which I never returned after passing by the first time. Not because it was hard to get to those places, but we'll get back to that in a bit. For some reason in Kalos, they arbitrarily decided to dissect the region into 3 separate parts. There's the Central Kalos, the Coastal Kalos, and the Mountain Kalos. Now, this is an interesting idea. My only problem is, how can you tell the difference? Just looking at the map, I can't tell where one section ends and the other begins. It seems almost indiscriminate. I honestly wouldn't have even known how to approximate it until I saw this overlay of the Pokédex icons on top of their respective areas. But even that's not accurate with what the game says. But even then, it seems to me that there are just as many mountains over on the coastal side as there are in the mountain section. I don't even really get why the dex is divided up anyway. It's not like it's by ecosystem. Even the coastal section has Pokémon that should definitely be in the desert. At least in Alola, it makes sense to have a separated dex because each island is unique, but Kalos is just one big block where you can easily stroll from one section to the next without any defining features. Am I saying that there should be a giant treacherous divide like Mount Coronet and Sinnoh? By no means do we need another one of those, but something would have been better than having it all in the same pot with only a thin idea as to what would separate them. Basically, if you're going to chop up your region into unique sections, actually do it instead of wasting my time. Number 5. Weak gym leaders. While I personally like many of the gyms, we need to really look at them. Viola, as much as I might like her, barely cracks double digits with her 2 Pokémon, one of which you might already have yourself. And neither of them knows a 4th move. Then you have Grant, whose gym puzzle is slow and tedious, but even with him having 2 of the best fossil Pokémon to date, they have an abundance of weaknesses, and it still seems a bit underleveled for how far along you are. Korrina could be seen as more of a challenge, but her ace is also a flying type, and again, each of her Pokémon only has 3 moves. Ramos is at a disadvantage just being a grass-type trainer, but again, his ace, while strong, only has 3 moves. In fact, the only one with a full moveset on his team is a Weepinbell. Not even a Victory Bell, a Weepinbell. Clement has the same problem with only having a Magneton instead of its evolved form, and dear Helix, it is the 5th gym! Can we please get a 4th move on any of these Pokémon? The last 3 leaders do have a bit better teams, being stronger and of more variety, but the last one is Ice. Seriously? You're gonna have the toughest guy have 2 pure Ice types, and one of the weakest defensive combinations in the game? And I didn't even notice this until right now, but each one of them only has 3 Pokémon. The supposedly best trainers in the entire region are handicapped to only having half a team? I understand that Kalos did not start this trend, but they did perpetuate it needlessly. Especially when you look at the Hoenn region around the same time. They didn't seem to have a problem with adding Pokémon to make it more challenging when necessary. It's just really hard to take the trainers that are supposed to be the best seriously as a challenge when you can take out most of them with your first 2 party slots. You'd think they would have at least given some of them Mega Evolutions on their team, but more on that in a bit. At least they give out some pretty great TMs. Number 4. Perma-climates. If you've been keeping track, I can sometimes get kind of persnickety when it comes to climates in the Pokemon world. Dindamel Town is always snowy, but even worse is the route right next to it that has a constant deadly blizzard that you need a mammoth to try and traverse. I wouldn't have an issue with that except it doesn't seem to be the northernmost point of the region, nor the highest elevation. The Pokemon League is almost right next to it, sitting on a mountain, and it doesn't have any snow at all. But then you also have the tropical city that's up in the mountains, so apparently that doesn't mean much. There is a desert in Kalos, but it might make the least amount of sense that we've had so far. If you look at the map, it's just a circle they decided to draw at random without any thought. It even shows a river going through it, for which there is no evidence when you're in the desert itself. Only faraway plateaus that can't be seen by any other locations surrounding the desert, which leads me to conclude that they must be cardboard cutouts of some kind. And not far from there is Laver City, which houses the Fairy-type gym and the Pokeball factory. But the issue is that the trees here, and on the next route, are all autumn-colored and seem to be constantly falling into piles. This makes for an interesting Mario Kart track, but I gotta say, that is not a healthy way for trees to be year-round. I can only assume that the Pokeball factory is just pumping out so much pollution that all of the leaves are dying off as soon as they crop up. The only one that makes any sense is Snowbell City, because they have machines to make the snow year-round. And really that's all I need. Just have a simple piece of throwaway dialogue that explains these impossible environments in their current predicaments, instead of just glossing over it without taking any questions. Number 3. Mega Evolution. I've made no secret about my distaste for Mega Evolution in general. Some people have agreed with that, while others have made known how wrong I am. And I will say, I'll at least give them the fact that they thoroughly explained why Mega Evolution suddenly exists. There was actually a significant portion of the plot devoted to it. Otherwise, many people likely would have been confused as to why this massive power-up appeared out of nowhere, and certainly would have gone on to complain. However, despite their adequate explanation, I find the whole institution not only to be unnecessary, but also morally reprehensible. First of all, Mega Evolution is powered by Infinity Energy, which came into the world after the ultimate weapon was used to end the Great War. Infinity Energy can do many things, like create an interdimensional portal for a meteor, or, create the fairy type in general, but it is essentially using the energy of dead Pokémon to give yourself a temporary power-up. Feel good about that, do you? But even if you don't care about that, you monster, the least you could do is show compassion for your own Pokémon, since Mega Evolution is an unnatural mutation that is harmful for those that are forced into it. Ironically, none of the unique Pokémon native to the Kalos region that were new for Gen 6 got a Mega, except for a Legendary, but that is entirely due to outside factors of marketing and that sort of thing, so that older Pokémon could be relevant again, but I digress. If you read a number of Dex entries, you can see that Mega Evolution is painful for the Pokémon. And the reason that some Pokémon look so drastically different in these forms is because their bodies are being horribly mutilated with unstable radiation. It literally breaks Glalie jaw because it couldn't handle the excess energy. Mega Evolution is defined as a burden for multiple Pokémon, and describes unhealthy levels of energy constantly building up in their body. It literally says that if Scizor battles too long with these highly dangerous power levels, that it starts to melt. Special bond with the trainer, my foot. This is cold, hard abuse, plain and simple. Some people have come to the defense of Mega Evolution by saying that it's some kind of return to how the Pokemon used to be a long time ago. To which I say that's a load of Tauros crap, because otherwise it would be a primal reversion. But even if that were the case, would it really be worth putting your Pokemon through all that pain and torture just to get a leg up in a single battle? I don't care what supposed bond it creates. I don't care what renowned trainers elect to use it. Mega Evolution has been too well documented as maltreatment and cruel exploitation of Pokemon, which is something that I could never condone. Number 2. Distributions. Now, this has nothing to do with real-world Wi-Fi events or anything like that. The distribution here refers to the towns themselves, which has me seriously wondering if they had any sort of real plan on where they placed these things before founding their cities. I mean, just simply look at this. Your hometown is a collection of 3 houses. It's really just more of a gated community, especially since it's no more than 40 steps away from what is considered an entirely separate town. But that's not even the worst of it. After this, we go through a forest and then hit up the first gym. That's fine. But then we go up to the next route and then go to Lumio City, where we meet the professor and battle for a second starter, where we then go on to the skate park route, then go to Campfire Town, but you're cut off from progressing by a Snorlax, so you have to go up through the next route to Parfum Palace to get the flute, but first you have to catch a guy's stupid fur-fruit. Only then will you be let back past the Snorlax onto the next route, with optional side areas of the daycare and the battle chateau, to go through a cave onto another route overlooking the beach, down to Ambret Town, over to riding a Rhyhorn to Turnback Cave to fight some Team Flare grunts, then actually back down to the beach, then finally reach the second gym. Sheesh, I thought Viola misspoke when she said her badge would tame Pokemon up to level 30, but I guess I needed it after all. It takes a bit of effort to get to Corina and Ramos, whose terrible town, for whatever reason, is split completely in half. If you're down on the shore area, you can't even reach the Pokemon Center without an extensive train ride up a mountain. But anyway, after that, it seems almost like every other town is a gym of some kind. If you started your journey from any other town, you would have a vastly different experience, since the gyms would be incredibly disproportionate. And don't give me that you would be under-leveled, because we all know that gym leaders intentionally alter their difficulty level based on the experience of the challenger, as shown by the first episode of Pokemon Origins. I know that's maybe not the first thing they think about when licensing out gyms, but their current setup in Kalos leaves it fairly lopsided. Number 1. Unanswered Mysteries. Kalos is a most enjoyable place for a Pokemon journey, with many fun diversions, not to mention the whole thing seems gorgeous. However, it doesn't take very long while traveling through to realize that some questions are brought up that are never really seen answered. The big one that we've already talked about is the power plant. You can go inside one portion of the power plant to battle some Team Flare grunts, so with that you would expect even more through any of the other doors, but instead they're all locked. All of those enticing science fiction looking structures far across the way that must surely hold many wonders? Yeah, well, you can never reach them, so you might as well forget about it. All the theories about what might reside there are all for naught, because apparently it's just nothing. But that's not the only one. It might just be me, but I can't really remember if there was any point to the Lost Hotel. Now, it has been a while since I've been through, but it seems that there was too much buildup for it to just be a glorified roller rink. And hey, if that's too minor leagues for you, look no further than one of the most memeable moments in all of Pokemon, the Ghost Girl. In Lumio City, if you go up an elevator, you will exit it only to have a chilling encounter with the spirit of some poor girl who is looking for someone, but luckily it's not you. And then that's it. I mean, you can find her again in some random hotel, and even in the Hoenn region, actually, but there's no story here. There's no side quest. This is just a thing that happens to you with no context around it whatsoever. It's infuriating for people like me who like answers, which is, most of them. And elsewhere in the Lumio City train station, there's a random note on the back of a display that clearly shows that something heavy is going down, but we never get to hear anything about it. Speaking of train stations, where does the station in Corway Town go? If you look at the map, it just heads off into the hills, and neither of the other train stations in the region offer a connecting track. What would we find if we followed those rails? And perhaps the biggest question mark of the Kalos region is conveniently shaped like one with Zygarde. Zygarde is supposedly the third in the legendary trio with the box art Pokemon, but you wouldn't really know it, since there's almost no lore or explanation given as to how Zygarde fits in. It's supposed to be all about the ecosystem, but didn't do anything when the world was about to be destroyed? Zygarde is almost an afterthought in what is considered its home region. If you really want any answers, you'll have to shuttle over to the Alola region, where you can find the Zygarde Cube as well as unlock its other forms at 10% and complete. Why can you not access those forms in its home region? Shut up, that's why. You'll never find out. We honestly learn more about Zygarde from the Haunted House guy if we assume that the theory is accurate that Zygarde is in fact the horde of faceless men. I think a main reason for these unanswered questions is fairly obvious, in that the Kalos region itself was handicapped due to limited exposure. Gen 6 had X and Y, but that's all the Kalos we got. We might not really think about it this way, but every other generation to date has had an additional game, some kind of sequel that could expand upon the existing story, or just continue it outright. But Kalos never got that chance. Any unresolved mysteries they might have intended to revisit will have to wait a decade or two until the region can be remade. I hope we will get those someday, but until then, the plethora of random, unexplained curiosities is a huge stain on the Kalos region as a whole. So, those are my top 6 Pokemon problems with the Kalos region. What problems do you have with Kalos? Let me know down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And we'll see you around next time!